Hello, Internet. I hope everybody is having a fantastic Sunday evening. We have an interesting guest tonight. We have a very special guest. Awesome dude, very kind, and it sort of came out of nowhere. If you guys remember, during the Columbia protests, when they first started off, somebody sent me a website, and it piqued my interest. So I started reading directly from the website because, as many of you guys saw, the protests at the Columbia University didn't really seem organic. We had the matching tents and same picket signs, and just things seemed a little off. And I started reading from a website, and they offered the types of services that that some of us had been suspecting that had been going on, not just the Columbia protests, but other protests that we've seen. Now, I don't want to imply that it was this organization that was at the Columbia protests, but they did offer some of the things that we were seeing. So I wanted to sort of throw it out there and just show that there are organizations out there that you can hire to promote what you are trying to promote. So I got the CEO from Crowds on Demand, Adam Swart. He's the founder and the CEO, and it's a very lucrative company, and he's a very interesting person, trail runner, probably a way better trail runner than I am, and very nice guy. So without further ado, I'm going to bring him in, and we're gonna talk for a while. So Adam,
Michael,
how are we doing tonight?
Great, Michael. Thanks for having me on your show, and I hope I'm a good trail runner. I certainly like it. I always think about running is it's really not about the competitiveness. It's about getting out there, getting some fresh air, getting some exercise, and enjoying all of that. It's really not about the stats, though. For some people, that can be inspiring.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know if you saw Zach Bitter, what he did today. He did his, I think it was his fourth best time on a 100-mile area. He did it another one in under 12 hours. Under 12 hours. He's a monster. He's an absolute monster.
That's superhuman strength, because a lot of people can have fitness, but to have that level of endurance, to just be able to stay with it is quite challenging. I think we were exchanging some messages about trail running in different places. I entered a trail run last summer in the Tour de Mont Blanc, and I joined this trail running group. I thought it was 20 miles a day. I guess when I got there, it was 30 miles a day, and I was like, whoa, okay, 30 miles of trail running per day. I think I'm in good shape, but not quite at that level. So that ended up being quite an interesting experience.
How many days in a row?
So it was 5 days in a row, but we had this interesting trail running guide. His name was Francois, and he was very militant about getting to the next campsite to have his aperitif. He's the most French trail running guide possible, because he had to be there by 6 p.m. Otherwise, they wouldn't serve him the before dinner drink. So he was quite a hard driver, and actually one girl had to be evacuated by helicopter, and then the whole thing just turned upside down. So it sort of ended on day 2.5. So I don't know how it would have gone if it had gone the full 5 days, but I think we were all secretly kind of happy that we didn't have to do the whole thing, but she made it out fine.
Yeah, that's monstrous. I've done an 85-mile week once, and that was I'm a middle of the pack guy, and I'm an AV technician. So that's one of the things I love about trail running, though, is you sign up for a race, you never know who you're going to end up running next to. And I live out, I'm doing a lot of them in Silicon Valley, so I'm meeting tons of people that are let's just say out of my league in terms of what we do for careers, and we have great conversations. It's fun. I love it. So
I love it. It's an amazing sport. It's an amazing sport.
Yeah, it's definitely the great equalizer as well. So you reached out to me, and I seem to probably have rubbed you the wrong way with the video I made. You seemed that you believed that I was alluding to the fact that it was your organization that was in fact on Columbia University campus. And if I made it seem that way, I mean, that isn't exactly what I was trying to do. I was trying to more show that these types of organizations exist. And it's not just your organization. There's a couple other ones that I found. There's geez, now I'm blanking on some of the other organizations' names, but they're not quite as big as yours. But I mean, we'll start off with just what is Crowds on Demand? How did you get started with it, and how has it sort of evolved over the years?
Sure. And let's just be kind of clear from the start. When you're talking about what happened at Columbia, we had no part in any of the on-campus demonstrations. We have gotten requests to be part of that. We've gotten many requests on both sides of the Israel-Palestine issue. And I looked at it and I said, there's no way that I see in terms of adding constructively. Whatever, anytime we take on a project, I want to be able to convince people. I want to be able to overall be taking on stuff that's making the country and making the world a better place. And if I feel like we've been in business for 12 years, if I don't feel like we have the ability to do that in an event, frankly, we have plenty of other campaigns we can take on that do fit that criteria. So we've kind of made that decision despite receiving hundreds of requests, including dozens of pretty lucrative ones. So to answer your other question, so what is Crowds on Demand? Well, we are basically a catalyst for building. We build movements. We organize demonstrations. We provide audiences. We do PR stunts, product launches, anything that involves needing to gather buzz and attention for a business or for a cause. We're the go-to company.
All right. Well, there's a couple of things on your website that sort of, they really jumped out at me. And the first one is when you go to protest rallies and advocacy, the description ends with, "We are the ultimate guerrilla lobbying and government relations firm." Now that seems a bit much. What do you can you elaborate on that at all? Guerrilla lobbying.
What part of it? Well, in the sense of any advocacy firm, any lobbying firm, government relations, lobbying has such a bad connotation that lobbying firms, lobbyists don't call themselves lobbyists anymore. They've come up with other terms. So I when we say guerrilla lobbying, we're talking about organizing phone banking. We're talking about organizing emails, organizing demonstrations, all in furtherance, whether it's a local issue, state, national, international, to push for change, right? That is what lobbyists do, but lobbyists are doing it from the back room. We're doing it directly, face to face, by organizing action to overall achieve our clients' objectives.
Right. So we're jumping ahead. We'll go out of order with the questions that I have, but you just brought it up right now, the phone banking. Now, if there's a congressman or a senator, and say somebody wants a congressman or a senator to vote in a certain way on a certain bill, is that a job you guys would take as a phone banking, call as the congressman's constituents and say, "I want you to vote this way"?
Not falsely as their constituents. If somebody wanted to organize constituent phone banking, we would organize constituent phone banking. If people wanted to organize phone banking that didn't have to be constituents, we would organize general phone banking, but we wouldn't falsely represent people to be constituents. Okay. If that's what you're implying.
No, that's what I'm asking. That's the clarification that I would want.
It wouldn't be. And additionally, if we were to take on something like this, we would also make sure that the people who were phone banking were people who were otherwise engaged in the issue, who otherwise supported the issue. Think about how many issues, Michael, that you might be passionate about. I know you're passionate about some of the crime that you're seeing on the streets in California, right? You're passionate about raising awareness probably against the defund the police, against the kind of lax prosecutors, right, that you've seen in California. And good for you, right? You may not have you can't go and call 10 congressmen and 10 council people per day, 20 of them per day, to advise them of your beliefs. But what if we paid you money to do that? We're paying you, Michael, someone who otherwise supports that policy, to make calls on something that you support, but because you have a job and you have responsibilities, you wouldn't otherwise have been able to make those calls. So we're actually facilitating your participation in something you believe in.
And so how do you guys find people within the constituency base of said congressperson? How would you go about arranging that?
Well, it obviously depends on the specific cause, right? So let's just use the example of an environmental issue, right? So, for example, let's just say we have the occasion to oppose the construction of some kind of cement plant, right? Well, we might reach out to local environmentalist groups or local environmentalists and ask them if they wanted to, how they felt about what was going on, and that we could provide them compensation for engaging in something they were otherwise passionate about.
Okay. Now, does crowds
the same way on the other end? If, let's just say, there was something about law enforcement, we might reach out to people who've expressed, who are pro-police, to say, hey, maybe you can get engaged on rallies for preserving police funding or harsher penalties for criminals, right? So we're looking for, in all of our events, because it's honest and it's also more effective to have people who are really engaged with the causes that they're making calls or protesting or otherwise involved in.
So does Crowds on Demand need to necessarily agree with the cause, or do you guys have a political leaning?
Well, Crowds on Demand doesn't have a political leaning. Of course, I have views on different issues. Of course, it's fun to take on efforts that you are passionate about. I like to say that we take on a broader swath of campaigns than those that directly comport with my views, but we have a line that we won't take anything obviously illegal or anything that's hateful. And there are other things that will come up from time to time, and such as if we suspect it's a foreign government, and that has happened. Foreign governments have tried to, in their own way, I suspect, bring us in. And we don't want to work with foreign governments to cause division in the United States, right? So if there's anything that I feel like is going to make this country a worse place, I don't take it.
That could be pretty subjective, though. And
well, it's my company, so that's my view of that, right? Just like you have your views and I have my views on what might make the country a worse place, right? So in my subjective view, there are certain things that we wouldn't take on. Now, what's illegal isn't subjective, right? So we don't take gigs where someone asks us, block off this road without a permit, right? Because that's illegal. We don't take gigs where it might be, throw stones at a building, because that's illegal, or deface a building, because that's illegal. So anything that's illegal, we do not take in any form.
Okay. Well, so that sort of brings me to the intelligence agency aspect of this. Would you guys say an intelligence agency called you guys up and said, hey, we want
agency.
Sorry?
The United States intelligence, not foreign intelligence.
Well, we'll get to the foreign one in a bit, but yeah. Any United States, like the FBI, if they hit you up and said, hey, we want some of you guys in the crowd for this event, was that something you guys would take on?
if what you're trying to imply is kind of like a crisis actor type thing, then no, because that's illegal. I mean,
No. Just protesters showing up with signs,
I think we'd have to look at that on a case-by-case basis. So stuff like that, we'd have to really look at on a case-by-case basis. I can definitively say we wouldn't work with foreign intelligence agencies because, again, that would be illegal. So number one, if something is illegal, we wouldn't do it, because then it doesn't even get to looking at an ethical standpoint. right? Because if it's illegal, even if I think it is ethical, we wouldn't do it, right? So when we're getting to the point where something is legal, right? So presumably if a US intelligence agency asked us to do something, it is legal, right? So in that instance, we'd have to evaluate it. So I couldn't give you yes or no's based on that kind of hypothetical.
Okay. Well, I think the thing that's on everybody's mind is, I mean, we've seen some craziness over the last 4 years, especially with what happened in the summer of 2020 with all the George Floyd.
Yep.
And the thing with a lot of those events, and I mean, it went on for a very long time. It was the whole summer, and it went into the fall and even into the winter in Portland with, those, they start off as protests and then they end up as riots. And I'm sure you saw there's a lot of speculation that there was agent provocateurs there. And I'm not asking, obviously you guys don't do anything that's illegal, but what's to stop you guys being involved in a protest and then agent provocateurs from some other organization, maybe even, well, any organization there with bad intent to be sort of working alongside you guys? You guys don't need to have knowledge of it, but it goes from being a legal, legitimate protest into something completely else. How do you separate yourself from that, and how do you sort of navigate those waters?
Well, and it's a really good question. The answer is that any kind of protest, whoever the organizer is, the more sensitive the issue is, the more likely something like what you're suggesting could happen, right? Because if you're talking about something on a sensitive issue, you mentioned the summer 2020 demonstrations around the death of George Floyd, right? If you are organizing demonstrations, you have to imagine that there could be people who may be more radical than you, who are part of the movement, but who believe in the cause, but maybe are taking it to a new level. And additionally, you have a certain element who attaches themselves to both right wing and left wing. I think they're anarchists that actually attach themselves to left wing. They attach themselves to right wing. It doesn't matter. They're looking to loot. They're looking to cause destruction. And whenever they see a large scale opportunity, these large demonstrations, the rowdier the better, they are going to capitalize on that. Now, if you're asking how we, Crowds on Demand, work to combat against that, part of it is we really try to stay out of the really large demonstrations on ultra sensitive issues. We are more focused on, we're less focused on that, because any of those types of things have that major risk. So we try to not organize things around events that could get in that direction. And secondarily, when we are organizing around sensitive causes, we often will bring in security and other factors to really try to make sure that there's a line. But anyone who's planning a protest of any sort does really run the risk of people who are not affiliated with the group ending up causing trouble, and then potentially being blamed falsely for that situation.
Right. So a lot of the things that we saw in the 2020 protests / riots that made people believe like this isn't organic, this can't be organic because of how much money has to be behind, just for example, like the signs. I just ran for office not too long ago, and I learned how expensive signs can be. And
yes, they're very expensive.
Yeah, and so when you see very quickly, almost overnight, a protest spring up, and then all of a sudden there's 1,000 signs ready to go, and they're all uniform, the same thing. That's clearly not just like an organic protest, and that has a lot of money behind it. I mean, you got the Crowds on Demand is sort of the most well-known organization that does this type of thing, and there is other organizations, but I guess my question is, did you guys have any involvement in any of the 2020 protests throughout the country?
Well, let me take this in two parts. Number one, I don't believe there is such thing as grassroots protest. There is no such thing as AstroTurf. It's every group, every advocacy group, every protest has money behind it. Some might have more, some might have less, but as you correctly said, signs cost money, banners cost money, flyers cost money, any kind of paraphernalia costs money. But the existence of money in something doesn't imply that the people involved in the movement don't believe in the movement, right? So if you take an example of let's go back even before 2020 of 2017, right? The pussy hat demonstrations around the Trump inauguration, right? The people there had various reasons for being there. I also like to say that there's no such thing as a protester that doesn't have an ulterior motive for being there, right? People might support a cause, but they're there to flex on social media. They're there for romantic connection, social connection, lots of reasons beyond just getting paid for someone to show up at protests, whether it's on the right or on the left, right? So let's be clear on that. But the pussy hat demonstrations, right? There's a lot of money for those hats, the permits, the signs, everything, right? But I think whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump, the sentiment there was genuine of the people who were there, right? So I think the challenge with trying to diagnose some of these movements is the reality is money is behind a lot of movements, and that doesn't mean that people aren't passionate about it. Money is just sort of the cost of entry to building a movement in the United States. The civil rights movement, the gay rights movement, every movement had in American history had money behind it, but that doesn't mean that people try to use the existence of money behind a movement as a way to delegitimize the movement. And I kind of reject that premise.
So does that mean if somebody said, hey, we want you to sort of infiltrate this protest that's already happening and paint, maybe scream louder than the typical protester would, not do anything illegal, but try to paint that protest in a bad light? Is that something
you're talking about, like a reductio ad absurdum, to use the Latin term of you insert yourself and then you can reduce that side to its worst parts?
Precisely.
I'll tell you, Michael, it's so interesting. We have gotten a lot of offers to do that. I will say it's something that we don't do because of the reasons you might think, but interestingly, it's been something that we get a lot of offers to do.
I would imagine, because there's a common name that pops up with sort of somebody that likes to throw a lot of money around to promote bad actors within a protest. And I mean, do you know which name I'm alluding to right now? A very wealthy man.
Yeah. Yes, I know the guy that you're talking about. It's like the Voldemort. It's like he shall not be named.
Oh no, we can talk about George Soros. I don't care if we're on YouTube. I don't care if my channel gets nuked. I really
sure.
don't care.
Yeah, I mean, we've been falsely linked to him for a long time by a lot of people, and I'm not that familiar with his broader work. I don't actually agree with the policies that he supports. I think I'm a fan of safe cities. That's a big passion of mine. We talk about trail running. I also love city running, right? It's no fun to run around a city when you're stepping on needles, when there are people taking crap on the street, when you're being flashed, all of which has happened when I've gone on runs in Seattle and San Francisco. So I'm not a fan of those policies, right? So interestingly, I would not take that's an example of someone whose money I actually wouldn't take because I strongly disagree with the perspective that he advocates. Now, I do think there's a lot of conspiracy theories in regards to him that probably aren't true. So I don't want to, by criticizing him, and I do criticize him, I don't want to associate myself with the vitriol leveled against him. But what I do want to say is I think his policies, the candidates that his organizations back, and the policies that they back are naive at best, right? They're naive at best.
The fairness at worst. You're talking about like the district attorneys like Chesa Boudin and Pamela Price.
You can't recruit someone to run for district attorney who works for Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, which Chesa Boudin did, right? And it's, the tragic thing about Chesa is that there's a perfectly good sourdough bread that shares the same name at Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco, Boudin Bakery, that I fear gets falsely associated with him and his policies, and they make really good bread. And that's actually kind of a tragedy. If I were Boudin Bakery, I would really try to make it clear that they had no affiliation with him. But look, I'm not a fan of the policies. I have a lot of I'm sure there's an infinite number of theories that one could postulate about why Soros backs the candidates he backs and the policies he backs. But safe to say, they are foolish policies, and they have made cities more dangerous, right? And they have made cities fundamentally less just, right? So the whole premise around it is that the prosecutorial system is unjust, and maybe that is the case, right? We lock up a lot of people. So it's not to say that there isn't some reform that might be needed, but to try to go ahead and tear the system down without having any idea what you're doing, and then you're letting violent offenders out with no bail, you're letting carjacking, car break-ins, retail theft, you're legalizing theft under $1,000. I wouldn't associate myself at all, nor would I advance his agenda. So it's part of why I wanted to come on your show and other shows that have made this implied link with Soros, is that I want to make it clear that that's not someone whose policies I support or would associate our company with.
So if Pamela Price's team hit you guys up, was like, hey, I need a crowd for my re-election, you guys would turn it down?
She's the Oakland DA, right?
Alameda County, correct? Yeah.
Alameda, yeah. I'm less familiar with her, but that's not typically how I see things. In fact, just a couple days ago, there was a gentleman who was apparently defending his home in Oakland. He was an elderly gentleman from a few intruders, and this is just the craziest thing. They took him into custody, and the reason why they took him into custody is they said he didn't make a statement. So wait, I thought we had a right to not speak and to not make a statement. So the fact that he is, as one should do, if in that situation, exercising his constitutional right not to speak, presumably so that he can confer with an attorney first, that was essentially used as grounds by the Oakland police to arrest him. It's nuts. So I would not associate myself or our company with those kinds of policies.
Yeah, I talked about that last night. That was a crazy case. From my understanding, he has been released. But the reason I thought that they might have arrested him is because apparently the firearm that he used, a Colt Python, was obtained illegally, or it was a stolen firearm. So I was thinking that might have something to do with it. But California has castle doctrine. So this is, if somebody enters your home illegally and they're trying to, you have every right to shoot them. So,
well, you should be presumed a threat if entering someone's private residence
in the middle of the night with a crowbar.
And by the way, they were coming in a stolen car, so I'm fairly confident that their reasons were nefarious. I hate to rush to judgment in these sort of criminal justice cases, but it does seem suspect, and I don't necessarily give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, me neither. So, all right. Are you allowed to talk about some of the protests that Crowds on Demand have participated in?
So one of the challenges there, right, is that if I do that, the issue becomes about us and not about the client's issue. So I see ourselves as a vehicle to help our clients get their point of view across. Now, eventually, again, one of the things I'm trying to do is destigmatize what we do because I think there is this false perception that there's somehow this nefarious component to it. So over time, eventually I might be able to do that. But right now, because some of the folks in the media and others have tried to stigmatize what we do and try to falsely portray it as nefarious, it's hard for me to talk about various clients and various projects that we're working on without then making me the story and then potentially diluting what the clients are trying to do. I'm a vehicle to advance our clients' objectives. They're not hiring me to be the spokesperson, right? And so that's the real challenge with it. And I think, so that's why I think it's so unfortunate that people have the wrong idea of what we do. And what we're really doing is we're compensating people for getting involved in causes that they believe in, right? And to me, that's a good thing. And it's no different from Tucker Carlson getting paid to speak his mind and to discuss his views on air, right? Or Rachel Maddow, or Sean Hannity, or anyone else that you might think of. These are personalities who have a view and are paid to express that view. Our folks are just basically the same thing. They're people who have a view and they're being paid to express that view publicly.
So, I mean, the problem with that example is we saw over the last 4 years, a lot of people that were expressing views like Rachel Maddow, that their programs are sponsored by Pfizer. So they appear to be getting paid to push a specific agenda that may not be in the best interest of the people. So,
and you're in media to some extent. How do you feel like the media personalities should fight it? Because every podcast host, whether you're Maddow making 8 figures a year or whether you're a podcaster making less, don't you still have those challenges that you have to balance editorial discretion with being able to make a living, right? And who do you feel like has done that well and not sold out?
Well, I don't know. I haven't gotten there yet. I'm not making a living from this podcast, so I just kind of talk about whatever I feel like talking about. But
which is a blessing in a way, right? That's a true blessing to be able to do that but as you grow and as people, if you have a devoted enough following, maybe you can sell subscriptions, right? Like Tucker does. I know Tucker Carlson does. I know some people try to do that. I know the New York Times also is trying to get subscriptions, right? But the challenge of balancing ad revenue and sponsorships with media objectivity is a challenging one. And the bigger you grow, the bigger that becomes a challenge. And the bigger the incentives are, like Joe Rogan or others, to try to hawk different products that you may or may not have confidence in.
Are you familiar with any other organizations that do the same thing that you guys do, but on a level that has less moral clarity?
Well, I'll tell you the people that if there are people who do this and do
there absolutely is. Like
they're not marketing. They're not out there marketing that they're doing illegal stuff, right? So if you're saying, hey, there are people who are doing a less ethical or perhaps illegal version of this and paying people to riot, paying people to deface property, I'm not saying that isn't happening. I'm not saying it is, by the way, but these people aren't marketing their services publicly, right? They are marketing to others very specifically, and they're probably working it like a drug deal, right? Does a drug dealer market online, or do they market offline to the customers that they know?
Right, but there's this crossover where you can see that there's some of these things that are so organized. Like, I keep going back to the Columbia protest examples.
It was organized. It was organized.
Highly.
But I'll tell you how it was organized. And by the way, you might find this interesting. I'll work you through it. So the essentially all of these. So someone has to buy the tents, right? So obviously everyone likes to point to the fact that the tents are. And let me preface this by saying, so again, I said this before and I'll say it again. The fact that it's organized doesn't mean that the people who are there don't believe in the cause. I think the people who are there do believe in the cause. Of course. You can call them misguided, but they believe in it, right? But okay, someone is buying the tents. Well, a 501c4 nonprofit would have the ability to do just that. So, and 501c4 nonprofits don't have to reveal their donors, right? So there are a number of 501c4 nonprofits that are affiliated with the Palestine movement that well could have made those expenditures and put up those tents. Again, I don't know. I think the nefarious part is that the encampment itself was illegal, right? They didn't have a right to be there. I think demonstrating, and I think if you, for example, a lot of people point to the fact that the signs might all be the same. Well, you're allowed to hold signs and you're allowed to hold them loudly. I think the fact that it's organized doesn't mean that people don't believe in it, but it is organized. But what protest isn't organized is, I guess, my question.
It's not so much the organization, it's the money behind it.
But what protest doesn't have money behind it? Is how can you have a large demonstration without money? You have to have permits, you have to have sound, you have to have a stage, you have to have AV. I mean, if we're talking about really big demonstrations, right?
Right. Well, but a lot of these really big demonstrations are illegal. Like for example, what we saw a few months ago, where they shut down the Golden Gate Bridge, they shut down the Bay Bridge, and before this event happened, I mean, this happened in multiple cities throughout the United States, and they made a social media ad, and the social media ad was very well done. Cinematography,
there's money. And 501c4s are allowed to do all of that. They really are. And I certainly, my thing is, I have my own suspicions of which specific 501c4s I believe were behind it, but I don't want to say that on air because I can't prove which 501c4 funded which project. But I would encourage your listeners to do research on which 501c4s were involved, because I do believe strongly it is one of those or multiple of those that were funding all of those types of efforts, and they were illegal. And you also, but speaking of legal or illegal, one group that I think your listeners should be aware of that has provided legal cover, so to speak, to all of this is the National Lawyers Guild. If you've heard of them, they make the ACLU look like the Federalist Society. They are a far left group. I mean, they wouldn't deny that. They're far left, and they have openly affiliated themselves with the Palestine events. And many times where the Palestine protesters were engaging in illegal activity and have been arrested or threatened with arrest, they have cited that they'll be represented by the National Lawyers Guild. So again, I want to be clear that I don't know what their involvement is, other than the National Lawyers Guild has specifically said that they're helping in some way in representing some of those folks.
At the end of the day, you're still a business, though. So if somebody comes to you, and you say you like to avoid the really big protests that are highly controversial issues, but I mean, you've sort of jumped into a pretty murky pool. You know, how do you decide? Because I mean, like you just said, you pointed out there's some other organizations out there that some 501c3s that have some bad actors that are probably up to nefarious things. You're sort of rubbing elbows with these people. You're under the same sort of umbrella. So how do you navigate that?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm under the same umbrella, and I don't associate myself with dubious groups, first of all. And I make it very clear publicly and privately that we don't engage in any illegal activity, right? So that's a big thing.
Have you ever had oh, sorry, go ahead.
And what I really hear you asking is, how do you navigate the fact that because of what we do and because of our somewhat unique capabilities to be able to organize demonstrations and organize activism, sometimes very quickly and at a large scale, do I ever feel to get tempted by offers from unscrupulous actors? And the answer is I don't, because I've been in business for 12 years by having a pretty good head on my shoulder and having a pretty good sense of what aligns with our values and what doesn't. And that's why we've decided not to involve ourselves in this matter, Israel, Palestine. And I'm not saying we never will, and I'm not even saying that we will never take a Israel, Palestine cause, but it has to be something that's constructive and not just part of the noise. I feel the same way in regards to that's why we weren't involved in, you asked earlier about 2020, the summer 2020 demonstrations. We didn't involve ourselves in those despite many offers. We're really focused on places where we can make a difference and not add to the noise. And a lot of times when we see something where you have two sides, Israel, Palestine, BLM versus MAGA, right? You have them, at each other's throats. And my question oftentimes is, what is crowds on demand adding? Who is crowds on demand convincing? And if the answer is we're just part of the noise, I tend to lean toward maybe let's not do it.
Even if there's a lot of money being thrown around?
Well, I think the challenge is that ultimately it is more rewarding for us to focus on what I will say that I do is that sometimes people who have money come to us with an idea that is more unscrupulous, and I talk them into, here's how you can constructively make a difference in a way that is legal and is above board and is more ethical. And sometimes I can convince them and sometimes I can, and sometimes it's so outrageous that I kind of thank you for your inquiry, but we can't help you. And again, the way I've stayed in business for so long is by having the discipline to be able to avoid those types of matters.
So there's a lot of situations, I guess. Like I'll go to the offshore wind. The offshore wind project that they're trying to push forward out in Morro Bay is a big concern of mine. And this seems to be, there's a lot of money behind pushing the offshore wind project. And that's
right up our alley, by the way. So like something like that, yeah, sure. We would we would get involved in something like that.
In what regard?
Well, that is the type of campaign that we do a lot of. I don't want to say in what regard because we're not affiliated. We're not working on that particular issue, but it's the type of issue that while certainly cause for passion is one that would fit with our values.
Pushing forward the offshore wind project?
Well, I would say I don't have strong opinions on offshore wind. So I'll put it that way. I don't have strong opinions on offshore wind. In some cases, it might make sense. In some cases, it doesn't. I don't have a strong opinion on it. So if you're saying, hey, could someone convince me you seem to be against it, and that's fine. But could someone convince me to be on one side or the other of that issue and to affect change? Absolutely.
Well, the thing with that issue is one side has money and one doesn't. This is specifically talking about Morro Bay. This is the citizens against the government, and ironically, big oil companies like BP and Shell are all bidding on these projects.
Right, because they're invested, because they're as part of the renewable stuff. They're all actually invested in wind, so you don't realize you're actually in business with the big oil companies when you're pushing the wind stuff. So I'm generally aware of that, and yeah, if you're saying that the wind industry is often very harmful to the natural environment, sure, I bet that might well be true. And Morro Bay is beautiful, and there are a lot of instances where the windmills can have a disastrous impact on the marine life.
Yeah, but I guess my point here is the people that are against the offshore wind don't have the money to hire an organization like Crowds on Demand to protest against it, but the organizations that are pushing forward offshore wind do. So,
but that's a money and politics question. That's not a Crowds on Demand question. That's essentially the people. But if they didn't hire Crowds on Demand, they would flood the airwaves. They would with advertisements. They would do social media ads. They are. So, right, maybe they are, right? So it's not a unique question to Crowds on Demand. What you're saying is, do people with money have more ability to get something done than people without money or with less money? The answer is absolutely. Welcome to the free market. Welcome to America. So actually, Michael, what I would say is that Crowds on Demand is often a force for the insurgent, metaphorically, because if you think about a wide-ranging media campaign that can run millions or tens of millions of dollars while doing protests and doing calls and doing activism, guerrilla government relations, so to speak, cost a lot less than that. So we are often on the side of the less moneyed interest against the more moneyed interest, because the insurgent interest might be able to gather enough money to hire us, maybe not in some cases, whereas they may never be able to have enough money to match dollar for dollar the ad spend on social media and on the airwaves. So we're often actually a David force as much more than we are a Goliath force.
Well, I mean, you can't know everything. You can't have a position on every. I mean, you just said that you haven't really picked a side on the offshore wind stuff. And I mean, have you guys ever gotten into a deal with somebody, any organization, whether it's governmental or private, and gotten sort of waist deep into it and realized, holy crap, we're on the wrong side of this thing?
Yes. And when that does, your next question is, what do we do when that occurs? And typically what we do is phase out our relationship with that effort over time, right? Because we have a fundamental duty to our customers that brought us in to do a good job for them. If it becomes clear that either the parameters of a campaign have changed or they're asking us to do something that we don't want to do, then what we have to do is, like in any business, phase out a relationship in a way that's fair to both sides. So that has happened, but not often, because I try to be careful in choosing clients.
What about employees? There's a lot of moving parts here. So have you ever been put in a position where you guys get involved in something and one of the people that you hire actually commits a crime and they get arrested, and then you have to sort of figure out how to handle that situation?
That has never happened, because we are very clear with people that we hire to run advocacy groups or demonstrate what we expect from them. And what I always tell people about that is you're most effective as an advocate when you are respectful, when you are kind, and when you are loud, right? When you start yelling at people, screaming at people, you're not going to convince people. So it doesn't even behoove you to actually do that. So we're pretty careful about who we bring in, such that we avoid having someone who would do that.
Unless we go back to what we were talking about before, where you called it something, you had a term for it, where they try to infiltrate somebody hires an organization to infiltrate a protest to paint it in a bad light.
Ad absurdum.
I'm not going to remember that.
It's a Latin term. It means to reduce something to the most absurd, right? So if you're conservative and you say Democrats want no police and chaos on the streets, that's a reductio ad absurdum argument, right? Because you're saying you're reducing it to the most crazy, right? Okay. Or if Democrats say conservatives want every criminal to be put to death, right? That's reductio ad absurdum. It's really taking maybe someone on an extreme tangent on it. So if you're saying, hey, someone could bring us in for that purpose, it's true, but I try to be careful in vetting things. And one thing that I will say, Michael, is I speak to every prospective client myself. So we don't take on any customers without my knowledge. So because of my experience being in this industry for 12 years, I have a good sense for what people are trying to do. And I really try to understand what a client is looking to get out of their engagement with us from the offset.
So, I mean, if you're approached by the FBI and said, hey, we want you guys to dress in khaki pants and blue shirts and march around in the nation's capital, is that something you guys would take on?
Well, I know what you're implying. So I would say, look, when you're talking about, again, something where you're infiltrating a movement and the other term that I think people might use for something like that is false flag. It's just not something that we do. We don't really work with intelligence agencies. I can't hypothetically say how I would respond to an inquiry, but I wouldn't do something like that if that's what you're after, because you're not making the country a better place by trying to make someone look bad. And try to falsely malign a movement.
Some would say you are. Some would say if you're creating a group like Patriot Front and Patriot Front, because Patriot Front doesn't do anything illegal. They march around with signs. They show up in a U-Haul truck, usually, for some reason. Uh-huh. Nobody ever sees them leave or arrive, but that's neither here nor there. But they're not doing anything illegal, and they are a bunch of dorks, and they say a bunch of really dumb stuff, and it does paint conservatives and sort of the MAGA movement in a negative light. So
what you're implying is, okay,
I'm asking. I'm not implying. I'm asking.
Right, but what you're saying is you could create ridiculous groups, and I guess you could do the same thing on the other side to make as instead of infiltrating, you're essentially making the most ludicrous groups and basically using that to then have the media give a bunch of coverage to that group and say that's who the other side is.
Look what they're doing. And
I mean,
to be quite frank,
familiar with the group that you mentioned, so I can't really comment on that, on whether that is or isn't some kind of front. I mean, I would tend to believe that if you're saying someone created it, I would tend to believe that it wasn't intelligence agencies. It's more likely a left-wing donor that would have funded something like that than intelligence agencies. I don't really think intelligence agencies are out there doing that exactly. I think there are plenty of gripes with them, but I don't know whether they're doing exactly what you're saying.
I mean, that's private donors versus
the evidence. I mean, again, what I always say, and with any kind of these type of theories, is, hey, if there's evidence, let's hear it, right? Let's hear it. That should be aired out. I mean, what I certainly kind of agree is, the entrapment issue is a legitimate concern, where you have intelligence agencies that do essentially entrap people. You take someone who's impressionable, and then you try to groom them to being violent when actually they might have been impressionable and stupid, and you actually made them into a violent person and then arrested them for it instead of infiltrated a group that was already violent.
Like the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping case.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really not familiar with it, so I don't want to comment on that specifically. But if that was the case with I've heard certain issues with that. I just haven't studied it, so I don't want to comment on that specific case. But I do know that they did it, and I know that under the Bush administration, they were doing that for a lot of Muslim American groups as well. So conservatives kind of made a pretty bad deal there by signing up for the Patriot Act and all that stuff, because now perhaps that apparatus and those is being used against them in some respect.
Okay. Well, you talked about how you try to steer clear of foreign influence and foreign governments, but on here on your website, you could probably talk about this specific example because it's on your website, but it says a foreign government hired crowds on demand to help generate a positive reception for its newly elected leader during the UN General Assembly. The concern was ensuring that the leader was well received by a U.S. audience and confidant for his work in the UN. Well, what if this person shouldn't be well received?
Well, that, by the way, that has nothing to do with the United States, right? So when I say foreign intelligence, I'm talking about a country that is looking, as adversaries are looking to do, to create internal divisions in the United States, right? Capitalize on our differences and make us look bad. It's different when you're talking about looking at a foreign leader and trying to set up a situation where there are people who, again, are otherwise supportive of that leader who are present to make sure that you're getting the best visuals possible.
Okay. All right. Well, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's a distinction.
Okay. So I got a couple questions in the chat here.
Sure.
So Wally World here asks, what would your company do to say help me get elected? How much would that cost? They're talking price point here. So say somebody wanted to hire 100 protesters to come to a rally that they're putting on, just an election. Somebody that's running for office and they want to put on a rally. Oh, actually, here's a perfect example. So Dean Preston out there in San Francisco.
I'm not
supervisor?
intimately aware, but what is he a liberal or conservative? What's
He's
his
a
deal?
socialist. He's a straight up socialist. The
Okay.
Tenderloin is in his district, but
Oh, okay. Yep.
his rallies don't seem too organic, and a lot of people speculate
Yeah,
that
but what they do, so I'll answer the question, but I'll tell you actually there's one very important thing that the left is able to do is they have union members, right? So unions are able to turn out. So when you see a lot of people at a liberal rally, and I'm not saying the Republicans don't do it with church groups as well, so they do it too. But what you do is unions, which tend to the leadership at least support the Democrat candidates, they incentivize their workers. So if you're showing up to the protest, somehow suddenly you end up with the good shifts. You don't show up to anything, somehow you have the bad shifts. So unions have been incentivizing people to attend for a long time, just as many other groups do, religious groups, cultural groups, and other things. They're able to incentivize people and just say, hey, just show up and hold a sign. So, if anything, the people that we provide are actually a lot more passionate about causes than some of the type of union folks who just kind of have to show up.
okay. Well, back to the cost question. So say they just wanted 100 bodies. There's somebody wanted 100 bodies to show up for their protest for their rally. Is that
It really did. So I don't really like to answer the cost question because I don't want to be held to specific numbers. And it also depends on the specifics of the rally and what is expected. Do you need people to speak? Do you need people to have what level of knowledge do you need from the participants at the event? Do you need people to be good enough so that they can do a media interview, or do you just need them to be down with the cause? So all of those are factors that influence the cost for the demonstrators, but it definitely is typically in the hundreds of dollars per person per to attend some type of event.
Here's a question from the RGS here in the chat, and I don't know if I can pronounce this name, but he's asking about a person named Zenek Bakala. Claims that Crowds on Demand was claims the firm was used to run an extortion campaign against him. I'm not alleging anything. This is the question that's being asked. Is that name ringing any bells? Zenek Bakala?
Well, that was all I can say on that matter is it was a civil legal matter that was resolved a couple years ago. So I can't get it. Obviously, when it comes to legal matters, I can't really comment on any kind of legal matter, even though that matter is behind us. But what I will say generally is that, yeah, it's not, we can't get into discussing a past legal matter.
Okay. All right. I'll wrap up. I've taken a lot of your time already, but I do want to ask about.
I love this conversation. I feel like it's been really interesting.
It has been productive, and it has definitely cleared up a lot of things. But I do want to ask you about investors in your company. I mean, there's some names that people don't like to be associated with. So, well, I don't want to phrase it that way. There's some names out there that have been associated with some would say some nefarious purposes. So, I mean, we already talked about the scary George Soros guy, but what about like the Koch brothers, Bill Gates, any of the World Economic Forum?
That they're investors.
Asking if they, well, yeah, I guess both. If they've ever invested in the company, or if they've used the company in any capacity.
Well, I get approached, I wouldn't say often, but from time to time by fairly big names interested in investing. We have at this thus far not wanted to do that because again, I want to run this company in a way that fits our values. And once you take on a majority investor or even a substantial investor, that ability, I would lose that ability. But right now we don't have any outside investors.
Okay. And then I guess same question with those names, the Open Society Foundation, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, any of these, like the United Nations right now is very clear. We have a border situation going on. And I don't know if you followed any of the stuff going on at the Darien Gap. Organizations like the Muckraker and Brett Weinstein have been covering this stuff. And this does seem to be a highly coordinated effort to get a lot of people to flood our border. And there's a lot of there's a lot of people in government that seem to be supporting that very thing for some reason when it seems to be completely against American interests. So would you guys take money, not necessarily for that purpose, but from these organizations that are backing that sort of thing?
Well, I judge everybody on what they're asking us to do in a specific case. So I would not point blank say I wouldn't take someone's money for a cause that is good. I can say that I wouldn't take anyone's money for a cause that is bad.
Okay. All right. But again, a cause that is bad is highly subjective. And you could think a cause is good. Like a lot of people got into the George Floyd protests in the very beginning, think they were doing something good, and they divulged into breaking windows, burning buildings, and all that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And that is a risk in any kind of political activism is you start a movement and the movement can end up becoming something that you don't want it to be long term. And like I said, that hasn't happened often, but it has happened. And when it has, we then try to distance ourselves and try to make sure that the client is taken care of, but also remove ourselves from the equation. But I guess in regards to the questions about these big name folks, again, I like I said, I wouldn't rule out working with anybody on a cause that is good, but I wouldn't take anyone's money on a cause that is bad. Yeah, you're right that this border stuff is very interesting. I mean, it's gotten I do think there are a lot of I think where I disagree with you is there are a lot of people who might be misinformed or might not know and might not have experienced some of the challenges of the border crisis. So they may think that they're doing the right thing when they're not. So I think there are a lot of people in America who are just very misguided, who don't really know much about, I mean, this is a worldwide problem, but who just, they might not know much about the issues and they hear one thing and that's all they need to know. And boom, they're for one issue or against an issue.
Right. And anybody can fall prey to that, including your organization. You can't be on top of everything. So do you structure do you structure your contracts or whatever with these people in a way that it's sort of an at-will thing where you can say, hey, you know what, this isn't what we signed up for. We're going to back ourselves out of this.
As you can imagine, each contract, particularly for a large scale engagement, is negotiated between us and the client. And a lot of those factors come into play. It depending, but typically I like to have an ability for either party to extricate itself from a contract if for whatever reason they don't feel like it's working well. But part of it is making sure, as you can imagine, most clients also want assurance that we won't abandon them cold turkey without making sure you have a transition path. But yeah, we try to have ways to be able to remove ourselves from things that go outside of our values.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, that's you've answered all my questions and answered some of the questions from the chat here. Is there anything else you'd like to throw out there before we end this?
Yeah, I want to make sure I answer everyone's questions. I love answering questions. So I'm happy to do this again if people are interested and will want to do some kind of Q&A. I'm not really even opposed to that, because my main major goal on coming on this program and other news programs that have been critical of crowds on demand is really to set the record straight on what we are and what we aren't, and to make sure that people know that what we're really doing is we're engaging people who have a particular view in the causes that matter to them, and hopefully doing a good job about it. So I hope I was able to answer everyone's questions, but I'm happy to do this again in the right context.
Yeah, you answered all of my questions, not necessarily the answers that I expected, but
Sure.
yeah, you did. All right. Well, I guess that's it. Thank you so much for coming on my show, Adam. And yeah, I'm sure we'll be talking again in the future.
Absolutely, Michael. It's been a pleasure. Have a good one, and I'm sure I'll be on again. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. All right, guys. Well, I mean, what do you think? He didn't dodge any questions. He was certainly, didn't stray away from anything. But let me catch up with the chat here. I'm sorry I wasn't as engaging with the chat as I normally am, but let's see. So Northside, Wally World, nice to see you guys. Yeah, hit that like button if you get a chance. RGS, if you would have hammered, man, you were doing the research, weren't you, in the background there? I don't want to bring up anything. He already got off, so I don't want to bring up anything that that I didn't get to ask him and he can't respond to. So I'm just sort of looking at the chat. The RGS, you would have asked some other questions. Matty Bracco, you're the man over there on X. I appreciate you hanging out. Podegan Stoner, nice to see you. All right, that is yeah, Matty Bracco, good. I got to your Just Crowds on Demand, work with open borders. All right, and Adam just thanked me for having him on, and he was a good guest. Seems like a good dude. There's obviously some there's some things he couldn't talk about, let's just say, but yeah, I'm sure I'll think of questions that I wished I would have asked him after this stream ends. So, all right, before we get out of here, you guys know how we do it. We got to read a joke from the greatest book ever written, The Truth About Chuck Norris, and I will be back here next Sunday. I don't have a guest lined up yet, but I might. There's been things that I've been working on, so I'll try to actually be back here next Saturday and Sunday, because you guys know how work is crazy right now. All right, here we go. Chuck Norris joke of the evening. I don't know if it's going to be good. You know the rules. All right, here it is. Chuck Norris joke of the evening. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. Someone once bet Chuck Norris he couldn't shit on the ceiling. Michelangelo still owes him $10. And on that note, stay CaliBased.